Once upon a time, in the cold and unforgiving land of the Yukon, a man decided to take a journey. This man was new to these parts, and he was heading to a camp where his friends were waiting. The only thing standing in his way was the harsh winter weather. It was a bitter cold day, and the man was all alone except for his loyal dog. He believed that he could conquer nature with his knowledge and determination. The man started his journey with a light heart and a hopeful spirit. He had been warned by an old-timer about the dangers of traveling alone in such cold conditions, but he brushed off the advice. He thought he could handle anything that came his way. As he walked, he noticed the frosty air around him. It was so cold that his breath turned into white mist as he exhaled. The man knew he had to keep moving to generate heat, so he quickened his pace. However, the conditions were worsening. The sky grew darker, and the snowfall became heavier. The path he was following was covered in a layer of fresh snow, making it hard to distinguish from the rest of the landscape. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white. North and south, as far as I could see, it was unbroken white. Following at the man's heels was a big native dog. It was a wolf dog, gray-coated and not noticeably different from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was worried by the great cold. It knew that this was no time for traveling. Its own feeling was closer to the truth than the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, than 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Because the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that there were 107 degrees of frost. The dog did not know anything about temperatures. Possibly in its brain there was no understanding of a condition of very cold, such as was in the man's brain. But the animal sensed the danger. Its fear made it question eagerly every movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned about fire, and it wanted fire. Otherwise, it would dig itself into the snow and find shelter from the cold air. He continued through the level forest for several miles. Then he went down a bank to the frozen path of a small stream. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew he was 10 miles from where the stream divided. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was traveling at the rate of 4 miles an hour. Thus, he figured that he would arrive where the stream divided at 12:30. He decided he would eat his dinner when he arrived there. The dog followed again at his heels, with its tail hanging low, as the man started to walk along the frozen stream. The old sled trail could be seen, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last sleds. In a month no man had traveled up or down that silent creek. The man went steadily ahead. He was not much of a thinker. At that moment, he had nothing to think about except that he would eat dinner at the stream's divide and that at 6 o'clock in the morning he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and, had there been, speech would not have been possible because of the ice around his mouth. The man sat in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens, using his teeth, and then stood on his feet. He glanced down to assure himself that he was really standing, because lack of feeling in his feet gave him no relation to the earth. His position, however, removed the fear from the dog's mind. When he commanded the dog with his usual voice, the dog obeyed and came to him. As it came within his reach, the man lost control. His arms stretched out to hold the dog, and he experienced real surprise when he discovered that his hands could not grasp. There was neither bend nor feeling in the fingers. He had forgotten for the moment that they were frozen and that they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could escape, he encircled its body with his arms. He sat down in the snow, and in this fashion held the dog, while it barked and struggled. But it was all he could do, hold its body encircled in his arms and sit there. He realized that he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his frozen hands he could neither draw nor hold his knife. Nor could he grasp the dog around the throat. He freed it and it dashed wildly away, still barking. It stopped 40 feet away and observed him curiously, with ears sharply bent forward. A certain fear of death came upon him. He realized that it was no longer a mere problem of freezing his fingers and toes, or of losing his hands and feet. Now it was a problem of life and death with the circumstances against him. He needed to build a fire. He needed it more than he had ever needed anything before. His life depended on it. He made a new foundation for a fire. He gathered dry grasses and tiny sticks. He could not bring his fingers together to pull them out of the ground, but he was able to gather them by the handful. In this way he also got many pieces that were undesirable, but it was the best he could do. He worked carefully, even collecting an armful of the larger branches to be used later when the fire gathered strength. And all the while the dog sat and watched him. There was an anxious look in its eyes, because it depended upon him as the fire provider. But as he fumbled with his numb hands, he realized that his fingers were useless. He couldn't even grasp the matches properly. The man's desperation grew. He tried over and over to light a match, but they slipped from his fingers like ice. He looked at the dog, hoping for some kind of solution, but the dog could only watch with its mournful eyes. His mind went from this to the thought of the old man. He could see him quite clearly, warm and comfortable, and smoking a pipe. "You were right, old fellow. You were right," he murmured to the old man. Then the man dropped into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day ended in a long evening. There were no signs of a fire to be made. Never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the evening grew darker, its eager longing for the fire mastered it. With much lifting of its feet, It cried softly. Then it flattened its ears, expecting the man's curse. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog howled loudly. And still later it moved close to the man and caught the smell of death. This made the animal back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and ran along the trail toward the camp it knew, where there were the other food providers and fire providers.